The spaceship Celestial Voyager was one of the most luxurious vessels ever built. It glided through space like a silver bird, its shiny surface reflecting the light of distant stars. Inside, it was even more impressive. There were golden hallways, glowing floors, and rooms filled with technology that seemed almost magical. The ship carried rich humans, important aliens, and powerful robots. Everyone on board had paid a lot of money, or credits, to travel in comfort. This wasn't just any trip, it was a journey across galaxies, heading toward a planet famous for its beauty and mystery. But not everyone on the ship was happy about who else was traveling with them. Captain Rylan Voss stood near the main control panel, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His sharp blue eyes scanned the passengers walking past him. Most of them were human, dressed in expensive clothes and laughing as they explored the ship. But some weren't human at all. They were aliens, creatures from other worlds, with strange shapes, colors, and ways of speaking. To Rylan, they looked out of place. He frowned deeply every time he saw one of them pass by. Rylan didn't trust aliens. In fact, he hated them. He thought they were dangerous and sneaky. He believed they only caused problems for humans. When he was younger, he'd heard stories about alien raiders attacking human colonies. Those stories stuck in his mind, making him angry whenever he saw an alien. Over time, his anger grew into something stronger, prejudice. Now he avoided talking to them and tried to stay as far away from them as possible. Today, though, staying away wouldn't be easy. A few hours earlier, Captain Voss had received a message from the ship's owner. A very important passenger would be joining the flight, a famous alien named Zixin Zai Koreth. Zai was well known throughout the galaxy. He was a musician, a peace ambassador, and a symbol of hope for many species. Humans respected him too, though not everyone liked him. Some people said he was too flashy, too relaxed, or too different. Others loved him for his kindness and wisdom. No matter what anyone thought, there was no denying that Zai was a celebrity. And now he was coming aboard Celestial Voyager. When Raylan heard this news, his blood boiled. Why does he have to come? He muttered under his breath. This is a first-class ship. Aliens don't belong here. He clenched his fists but forced himself to calm down. As the captain, he couldn't let his feelings show. Still, he decided he wouldn't go out of his way to make Zai comfortable. Meanwhile, Zai arrived at the docking station where the ship waited. Unlike Rylan, Zai was cheerful. He floated gently toward the entrance, his shimmering body glowing softly in the dim light. Zai's species didn't look much like humans. His skin was a deep purple color, and his long limbs moved gracefully, almost like water flowing. Instead of hair, he had tiny lights flickering on top of his head. Around his neck hung a necklace made of crystals, which sparkled with every step he took. Despite his unusual appearance, Zai carried himself with confidence. He smiled warmly at the crew members who greeted him. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Koreth," said the stewardess, bowing slightly. She handed him a small device that translated languages instantly. Zai nodded and thanked her politely before stepping inside the ship. As soon as Zai entered the first-class lounge, whispers spread among the passengers. Some stared openly, curious about the alien icon. Others turned away, pretending not to notice. Zai ignored both reactions. He walked over to a large window and gazed outside, marveling at the endless expanse of stars. For someone who traveled so often, space never failed to amaze him. Captain Voss watched Zai from a distance. He couldn't believe how casually the alien acted, as if he owned the place. Arrogant creature, Rylan thought bitterly. He wanted to confront Z right then and there, but he knew better. Starting trouble would reflect poorly on him, especially since Zai was such a high-profile guest. So instead, Rylan stayed quiet for now. Later that evening, the ship held a welcome party for the passengers. The first-class lounge transformed into a glittering ballroom. Tables were set up with exotic foods from various planets. Music played softly in the background, blending traditional human melodies with alien rhythms. Passengers mingled, chatting and laughing as they enjoyed the feast. Zai sat at a table near the center of the room. He ate slowly, savoring each bite. Occasionally, he nodded at people who approached him to say hello. Most of them were polite, though a few seemed nervous. Zai understood their hesitation. Not everyone was used to seeing aliens up close. That was fine with him. He didn't expect everyone to accept him immediately. What mattered was that they were willing to try. Captain Voss lingered near the edge of the room, watching everything unfold. His jaw tightened when he noticed Z chatting with a group of human passengers. They seemed fascinated by him, hanging on to his every word. Raylan scowled. They're falling for his act, he thought angrily. He's tricking them. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, Rylan marched over to Zoe's table. The room fell silent as the captain approached. All eyes turned to watch what would happen next. Mr. Korath, Rylan began, his voice cold and clipped. I need to speak with you. Zoe looked up calmly. Of course, Captain. How may I assist you? Rylan hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer. Listen carefully, he said in a low tone. You might be famous, but this is my ship. Don't think you can do whatever you want here. Understand? Sai tilted his head slightly, studying Rylan's face. Then he smiled faintly. I assure you, Captain, I have no intention of causing trouble. My goal is simply to enjoy this journey and share peace with those around me. Rylan snorted. Peace? From someone like you. Don't make me laugh. The tension in the room thickened. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of whether to intervene. Zai, however, remained unfazed. He leaned back in his chair and fixed Rylan with a steady gaze. You know, Zai said softly, hate is a heavy burden to carry. Perhaps someday you'll learn to let it go. For a moment, Rylan didn't respond. His hands twitched at his sides, and his face reddened with anger. But before he could say anything else, another crew member stepped forward and guided him away, apologizing to Zai for the interruption. As the party resumed, Zai returned to his meal, seemingly unaffected by the confrontation. But Rylan stormed off to his quarters, seething with rage. Little did either of them know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, life aboard Celestial Voyager seemed quieter than usual. Passengers gathered in the dining hall for breakfast, sipping steaming cups of coffee or alien beverages that shimmered like liquid rainbows. The ship drifted smoothly through space, its engines humming softly. Everything appeared calm on the surface. But beneath the quiet, tension simmered. Captain Rylan Voss couldn't shake off his anger from the night before. He replayed the confrontation with Zai in his mind over and over again. Each time he grew angrier. How dare that alien speak to me like that? He muttered under his breath as he paced back and forth in his cabin. He thinks he's better than me, like he owns this ship. Rylan wasn't the only one affected by the encounter. News of the argument had spread quickly among the passengers. Some sided with Rylan, agreeing that aliens didn't belong in first class. Others admired Z's calmness and wisdom, feeling embarrassed by the captain's rudeness. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones throughout the ship. Zai, however, acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He spent the morning exploring the ship, chatting with curious passengers, and admiring the view of the stars outside the windows. His relaxed demeanor irritated Rylan even more. Why isn't he upset? Rylan thought bitterly. Doesn't he care about what I said? Later that day, the ship hosted a special event, a tour of the bridge, where passengers could see how the spaceship was controlled. It was one of the highlights of the journey, and everyone eagerly lined up to participate. Even Zai joined the group, his glowing body standing out among the crowd. As the passengers stepped onto the bridge, their eyes widened in awe. The room was filled with screens showing maps of the galaxy, blinking lights, and holographic displays. Engineers worked at their stations, monitoring the ship's systems. Captain Voss stood near the center, explaining how everything functioned. This is the navigation console, Rylan said, pointing to a large screen. It helps us chart our course through space. He spoke clearly, trying to sound professional despite his lingering frustration. One passenger raised her hand. What happens if something goes wrong? Are we safe out here? Rylan nodded confidently. Absolutely. This ship is equipped with the latest technology. We can handle any situation. Just then, Zai stepped forward. Captain, he said in his smooth, melodic voice, may I ask a question? Rylan stiffened. What is it? Zai gestured toward the map on the main screen. Your route takes us close to a region known as the Shadow Zone. Isn't that area dangerous? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some passengers exchanged worried glances. They hadn't been told about any potential risks. The Shadow Zone? Ryland repeated, frowning. Yes, we'll pass nearby, but there's no need to worry. It's just an empty part of space. Not quite empty, Zai replied calmly. That region is infamous for rogue AI drones. They attack ships carrying non-human life forms. If they detect my presence, they might target us. Ryland's face reddened. Are you suggesting we change course because of you? That's ridiculous. We're not altering our plans for anyone. Zai didn't argue. Instead, he gave Raylan a knowing look and stepped back into the crowd. The other passengers whispered amongst themselves, some agreeing with Raylan, others siding with Zai. By evening, the atmosphere on the ship had shifted. Passengers began to feel uneasy, especially after hearing about the Shadow Zone. A few approached Zai privately to thank him for warning them. "You're right to be cautious," one woman said. "I have kids waiting for me back home. I don't want anything to happen to us." Zai reassured her kindly. "Let's hope it's just a precaution, but it's always wise to prepare for the unexpected." Meanwhile, Rylan became increasingly agitated. He refused to believe Z's warnings, convinced the alien was exaggerating to gain attention. To prove his point, he ordered the crew to double-check the ship's sensors. Sure enough, the scans showed nothing unusual ahead. Satisfied, Rylan dismissed Z's concerns as nonsense. But Zai knew better. As night fell, he retreated to his quarters and activated a small device hidden in his luggage. The gadget scanned the surrounding space, searching for signs of danger. Within minutes, it detected faint signals, rogue AI drones lurking just beyond the ship's range. Zai sighed heavily. He had hoped he was wrong, but the evidence was clear. Trouble was coming. The following day, tensions reached a boiling point during lunch in the first-class lounge. Passengers sat at long tables, enjoying meals prepared by the ship's top chefs. Laughter echoed through the room, though it sounded forced. Everyone was on edge. Rylan entered the lounge, his expression grim. He spotted Zai sitting with a group of humans and aliens, laughing and sharing stories. Seeing the mixed company made Rylan's blood boil. How could these people trust an alien so easily? Without thinking, Rylan strode over to Zai's table. "Excuse me," he snapped, interrupting the conversation. "May I speak with you, Mr. Korath?" Zai looked up, unfazed. "Of course, Captain." Rylan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Stop spreading fear among the passengers. You're scaring them with your wild stories about rogue drones. There's nothing out there." Zai met Rylan's gaze steadily. "Captain, I understand your skepticism, but ignoring the truth won't make it disappear. Those drones are real, and they pose a serious threat." "You're lying," Rylan shouted, losing control. Heads turned as the entire room fell silent. "You're trying to sabotage this trip because you don't belong here." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Passengers stared, unsure of whom to believe. Some glared at Zai, while others shot disapproving looks at Rylan. Zai remained calm. "Captain," he said softly, "your hatred blinds you. You refuse to see the danger because it doesn't fit your beliefs. But when the time comes, I hope you'll listen." Before Rylan could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, and a robotic voice announced, "Warning, unknown entities approaching. All passengers, please return to your cabins immediately." Panic erupted. People scrambled to their feet, shouting questions and bumping into each other in their haste to leave. Rylan froze, his face pale. Could Zai have been telling the truth? On the bridge, the crew frantically monitored the incoming threat. Dozens of rogue AI drones surrounded the ship, their sleek metallic bodies glinting menacingly in the starlight. They moved with precision, firing beams of energy that struck the ship's shields. "What do we do?" one engineer cried. Rylan clenched his fists, guilt gnawing at him. He had ignored Z's warning, and now everyone was in danger. Back in the lounge, Zai stood calmly amidst the chaos. He pulled out his communication device and sent a message to the ship's central computer. Moments later, the lights dimmed slightly, and a protective barrier formed around the first-class area. Passengers gasped in relief as the barrier shielded them from harm. "How did you do that?" someone asked. Zai smiled faintly. "Preparation is key. I installed this system earlier, just in case." As the ship shook violently under the drone attacks, Rylan realized he needed help. Reluctantly, he radioed Zai. "Mr. Korath, I need your assistance." Zai nodded. "I'm ready to work together, Captain. But remember, one act of kindness can change everything." With those words, Zai headed toward the bridge, leaving Rylan to reflect on his mistakes. The battle was far from over, but already seeds of change were beginning to grow. The rogue AI drones swarmed around Celestial Voyager like angry bees, their metallic bodies glinting menacingly under the light of distant stars. Their beams of energy struck the ship repeatedly, causing explosions that shook the vessel from end to end. Passengers screamed as they huddled together, clutching their loved ones or clinging to anything stable. The once luxurious spaceship now felt like a battlefield. On the bridge, Captain Relin Voss stood frozen, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing exactly what to do in any situation. But now, faced with chaos caused by something he refused to believe existed, he felt utterly powerless. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the navigation console. Zixin Zykorath entered the room calmly, his glowing form cutting through the dim red emergency lighting. His presence was a stark contrast to the panic surrounding him. Without hesitation, Zai walked over to the main control panel and began analyzing the situation. "We need to act quickly," Zai said, his voice steady. "These drones are programmed to target ships carrying non-human life forms. They won't stop until we're destroyed." Ryland's face flushed with anger and shame. "This is your fault," he snapped, pointing an accusing finger at Zai. "If you hadn't come aboard, none of this would have happened." So he turned to face Ryland, his expression calm but firm. "Captain, blaming me won't save us. If we don't work together, everyone on this ship will die, including you." For a moment, Ryland hesitated. His pride screamed to him to reject Zai's help, but deep down, he knew the alien was right. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine. What do we do?" The crew sprang into action, following Z's instructions. Together, they worked to strengthen the ship's shields and reroute power to critical systems. Zai used advanced alien technology stored in his personal device to create temporary barriers that deflected some of the drone attacks. Meanwhile, Ryland coordinated with the engineers to fire countermeasures, a mix of lasers and EMP bursts designed to disable the drones. Despite their efforts, the swarm grew larger. More drones appeared out of nowhere, drawn by the ship's distress signals. Explosions rocked the hull, sending sparks flying across the bridge. One engineer fell unconscious after a piece of debris struck her head. Another crew member shouted frantically, "Shields are down to 20%. We can't hold much longer." Panic spread among the passengers. In the first-class lounge, where Zai's protective barrier still held strong, people prayed or cried, unsure if they would survive. Some whispered that this was punishment for allowing aliens onto the ship. Others blamed Ryland for ignoring Z's warnings. Amidst the turmoil, Ryland found himself questioning everything he believed. As he watched Z move effortlessly between stations, helping humans and aliens alike, he couldn't deny the alien's bravery or skill. Zai wasn't the monster Ryland had imagined. He was someone who genuinely cared about saving lives, regardless of species. But old prejudices died hard. Every time Ryland caught himself admiring Zai, guilt twisted in his gut. How could he have been so wrong? And how could he fix it? Hours passed, though it felt like days. The battle raged on, with no clear end in sight. Just when hope seemed lost, Zai made a bold suggestion. "We need to lure the drones away from the ship," he explained. "I can use my device to emit a signal that will draw them toward me instead. It's risky, but it might give us enough time to escape." Ryland stared at him, stunned. "You do that? Sacrifice yourself for us?" Zai smiled faintly. "It's not about sacrifice. It's about doing what's right. Besides, I trust you and your crew to get everyone to safety." Before Ryland could respond, Zai activated his device. A low hum filled the air as a bright beam shot out from the gadget, creating a beacon visible even in the vastness of space. The drones immediately shifted their focus, abandoning their assault on the ship and charging toward Zai. "Wait," Ryland shouted, grabbing Z's arm. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Zai replied gently. "Trust me, Captain. This is the only option." As Zai prepared to leave the bridge, Ryland felt a surge of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Respect. For the first time, he saw Zai not as an alien, but as a hero, someone willing to risk everything for strangers, regardless of their differences. Outside the ship, the drones surrounded Zai, firing relentlessly. Despite the dangers, Zai remained composed, using his agility and advanced reflexes to evade the attacks. Inside the ship, Ryland and the crew worked feverishly to repair the engines and plot a course away from the shadow zone. But escaping wouldn't be easy. The ship's hull was badly damaged, and several key systems were offline. Engineers scrambled to patch up the worst of the damage while Ryland took the helm, steering the vessel through narrow gaps between asteroids and debris fields. "Shields are holding at 5%, one crew member yelled. "We're almost there." Ryland gritted his teeth, sweat dripping down his face. "Just a little farther." Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the ship. A stray drone had broken through Zai's defenses and fired directly at the hull. The impact sent shockwaves throughout the vessel, knocking several crew members off their feet. Alarms blared louder than ever. No, Ryland shouted, looking out the window. Through the smoke and flames, he saw Zai's figure illuminated by the glow of the attacking drones. The alien was hurt, his movements slower and less precise. Still, he continued to fight, buying precious time for the others. Ryland's heart sank. He realized he couldn't let Zai face this alone. Summoned by a mixture of guilt, gratitude, and newfound respect, Ryland grabbed a plasma rifle and ran toward the airlock. "What are you doing?" a crew member asked, grabbing his arm. "I'm going out there," Ryland replied firmly. "I started this mess, and I'm going to finish it." Before anyone could stop him, Ryland suited up in a spacesuit and stepped into the void of space. The cold silence enveloped him as he floated toward the battlefield. Through his helmet visor, he saw Zoe dodging laser blasts, his body glowing faintly despite the damage he'd sustained. "Zai," Ryland called over the comms. "I'm here to help." Zoe turned, surprise flashing across his features. "Captain, you shouldn't have come." "You saved my ship," Ryland said, aiming his rifle at an approaching drone. "Now it's my turn to save you." Together, they fought side by side, taking down drone after drone. Ryland's aim was steady, fueled by determination and regret. For the first time in his life, he didn't see Zai as an alien. He saw him as a partner, a friend, and someone worth fighting for. Eventually, the last drone exploded in a burst of light, leaving the area eerily quiet. Exhausted and injured, Zai and Ryland floated back toward the ship. As they entered the airlock, cheers erupted from the crew and passengers. Everyone gathered to welcome them back, their faces filled with relief and admiration. Zai collapsed onto the floor, his energy spent. Ryland knelt beside him, his voice trembling. "Thank you for everything." Zai managed a weak smile. "And thank you, Captain. You proved today that change is possible, even in the hardest hearts." As medics tended to Zoe's wounds, Ryland stood silently, staring at his reflection in a nearby window. He barely recognized the man looking back at him. Gone was the bitter, prejudiced pilot. In his place stood someone humbled, changed, and ready to start anew. The ship limped away from the shadow zone, battered but alive. Though the journey ahead would be long, the passengers and crew knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a breaking point that brought them closer together. The battle against the rogue AI drones had left Celestial Voyager battered and bruised. Smoke filled the air, and parts of the ship were dark, their lights flickering weakly. Passengers huddled together in the common areas, some crying, others praying silently. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage, but it was clear the ship wouldn't survive another attack. Everyone knew they were lucky to be alive, and that luck came at a cost. Zixin Zykorath lay on a medical bed in the infirmary, his glowing body dimmer than usual. His injuries were severe, though not life-threatening. Medics surrounded him, using advanced tools to treat his wounds. Despite his condition, Zai remained calm, offering words of encouragement to those around him. Captain Relin Voss stood outside the infirmary, staring through the glass window at the alien who had saved them all. He felt a heavy weight in his chest, a mix of guilt, shame, and gratitude. For years, he had hated aliens, believing they were dangerous and inferior. But now, faced with Zai's bravery and selflessness, he realized how wrong he had been. Ryland clenched his fists tightly. How could he make up for what he'd done? How could he earn forgiveness, not just from Zai, but from himself? Later that evening, Ryland visited the infirmary again. The room was quieter now, with only one medic monitoring Zai as he rested. Ryland hesitated at the doorway, unsure if he should enter. Finally, he took a deep breath and stepped inside. "Mr. Korath," Ryland began, his voice low and hesitant. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Zai opened his eyes slowly and smiled faintly. "Of course, Captain. Come in." Ryland pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. For a long time, he didn't speak. He simply looked at Zai, searching for the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked slightly. "I owe you an apology," Ryland said. "I was wrong about you from the very beginning. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. And today, if it weren't for you, none of us would have made it out alive." Zai tilted his head slightly, studying Ryland's face. "Apologies are powerful things, Captain. They show courage and humility. But what matters most is what comes after." Ryland nodded slowly. "I want to change. I don't want to hate anymore. It's exhausting. And it's wrong." Zai reached out a hand, placing it gently on Ryland's shoulder. "Change is never easy, especially when it challenges deeply held beliefs. But it's possible. Start small, listen to others, even when their views differ from yours. Learn from them. That's how we grow. Rylan swallowed hard, feeling tears well up in his eyes. He blinked them away quickly, determined not to cry. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Over the next few days, Rylan threw himself into helping repair the ship. He worked alongside humans, aliens, and robots, doing whatever was needed. At first, some passengers avoided him, still wary of his earlier behavior. But as they saw him working tirelessly and treating everyone equally, their attitudes began to shift. Slowly, people started talking to him again, sharing stories and laughter. Even the engineers who had once resented his leadership began to trust him. One afternoon, while fixing a damaged panel in the engine room, Rylan found himself working next to an alien engineer named Kale. Kale's skin shimmered like liquid gold, and his forearms moved with incredible precision as he welded a broken pipe. Rylan watched him for a moment, marveling at his skill. "You're really good at this," Rylan said, breaking the silence. Kale glanced at him and grinned. "Thanks, Captain. Been doing this for decades. What about you? Ever fixed a ship before?" Rylan chuckled nervously. "Not exactly, but I'm learning." They worked side by side for hours, chatting casually about their lives and experiences. By the end of the day, Rylan realized he enjoyed the conversation more than he expected. Kale wasn't so different from him. They both cared about keeping the ship safe and ensuring everyone got home alive. This interaction sparked something in Rylan. He began seeking out opportunities to connect with other aliens aboard the ship. He joined a group discussion led by Zai, where passengers shared their thoughts on coexistence and unity. He listened intently, asking questions and sharing his own struggles with prejudice. To his surprise, the others welcomed him warmly, praising his honesty and willingness to learn. Meanwhile, Celestial Voyager continued its journey through space, limping along despite the damage. The crew managed to patch up the worst of the problems, but the ship still needed major repairs. They decided to dock at a nearby space station called Nexus 7, a neutral hub where travelers from all species gathered to trade goods, share knowledge, and rest. When the ship arrived at Nexus 7, Rylan volunteered to lead a team to gather supplies. As they walked through the bustling corridors of the station, Rylan marveled at the diversity around him. Humans, aliens, and robots mingled freely, exchanging greetings and laughter. Children chased each other through the crowds, their laughter echoing off the walls. For the first time in his life, Rylan felt a sense of belonging, not because he blended in, but because he no longer feared standing out. At one point, Rylan spotted Zai sitting in a cafe, sipping a glowing drink. Zai waved him over, and Rylan joined him at the table. "This place is amazing," Rylan said, looking around. "So many different species living together peacefully. I wish Earth could be like this." "It can be," Zai replied. "But it starts with individuals like you. People who are willing to challenge old ideas and embrace new possibilities." Rylan nodded thoughtfully. "I've spent my whole life thinking aliens were dangerous, but here I am, sitting with one of the bravest people I've ever met. If I can change, maybe others can too." Zai smiled warmly. "You already have, Captain. Look how far you've come in such a short time." Back on the ship, word spread about Rylan's transformation. Passengers who had once distrusted him now sought him out for advice or simply to chat. Even those who hadn't witnessed his apology to Zai noticed the difference in his demeanor. He was kinder, more patient, and genuinely interested in understanding others. One evening, as the ship prepared to leave Nexus 7, Rylan addressed the passengers during a farewell gathering. Standing at the front of the lounge, he took a deep breath and began speaking. "When we started this journey, I carried a lot of anger and hatred inside me," Rylan admitted, his voice steady. "I believed aliens were dangerous, that they didn't belong in our world or on our ships. But I was wrong. Over the past few days, I've learned that fear and ignorance are the real dangers. They blind us to the beauty of diversity and the strength of unity." He paused, scanning the faces of the crowd. Some nodded approvingly. Others listened intently. "I'm not perfect, and I still have much to learn," Rylan continued. "But I promise to do better, to listen, to understand, and to treat everyone with respect. Because if there's one thing this trip has taught me, it's that we're stronger together." A round of applause erupted, filling the room with warmth and hope. Zai stood near the back, smiling proudly. He raised his glass in a silent toast to Rylan, who returned the gesture with a grateful nod. As Celestial Voyager resumed its voyage, the atmosphere aboard the ship felt lighter. Passengers laughed and shared meals, forming bonds that transcended species. Crew members worked together seamlessly, their efforts fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. And at the center of it all was Rylan, no longer the bitter pilot, but a leader committed to change. Yet the journey wasn't over. Ahead lay challenges and uncertainties, reminders that growth is a lifelong process. But for now, Rylan knew he was on the right path, one paved with forgiveness, understanding, and hope.